Welcome to episode 103 of the Valley Sports Talk podcast. As always, I'm Noah, joined by Brandon. I've actually, so the quick story before we get started to our podcast today. I was working. I only usually wear my headphones when I do like big houses or buildings at work. And this whole week, of course, was like the week I do really nice houses. So I had my headphones for most days this week. And I went back and listened to a bunch of our old podcasts when we used to have like B-Fish and them on. And we always would like, I would always do an intro and say like my name's Noah and I'm joined with, and forgot we stopped doing that. Like people that are listening on Spotify. Like I know on Zoom you can see our names. It says Noah Miller and Brandon, but like people on Spotify, they have no idea what our names are if they don't click on our profile. So yeah, I'm Noah. I'm co-host
It has.
with Brandon.
It is fun to like listen back to them. I have done
I
that
was
too.
listening to like our one the other day where we did power rankings in the NFL, and we talked about like how we started the podcast and stuff and how we like met and stuff. And it was actually pretty funny to go back and listen to it.
Yeah, I bet. Oh, it's something. And speaking about stuff like that, like today, because we can talk a little bit about it. Right after this podcast finished, you're leaving to the Calgary Stampede, where if you're not from Canada, because most of our listeners aren't, um, the Calgary Stampede's probably the biggest festival in Canada, I would
I
say.
would I would say it's the most known.
Yeah, definitely. It's
Like
basically
if somebody talks about a festival in Canada, the first thing that's probably going to come up is the Calgary Stampede.
For sure. And it basically, to describe it in 4 words, it's like drinking, music, cowboys, cowgirls. Like that's kind
So
of how
I'm
I
literally, if you know
think.
me, I'm probably the worst person that is going to the Stampede. But actually, our me and Brandon's roommate is there right now. Um, and he's from
Who's even
Britain, so
worse?
he
He's
might be
even
worse.
worse.
But I don't know if are on his girlfriend's private story, but she posted like a picture the other day, and I could see Josh in like the corner of the picture. He's wearing a cowboy hat and he's wearing Air
Oh
Forces.
no. Re-
Like his blue
You
and white
can't
Air
do that.
Forces there that he wears out. Like
Yeah.
that Air Forces and cowboy hats don't mix. But yeah, like Brandon said, I am headed to the Calgary Stampede. In under 2 hours, I'll be driving to Ottawa. We fly out early tomorrow. So yeah, I'll be there for 5 days. Head up to Banff. But yeah, like I said, getting out of the story, I figured that we do a new intro where we introduced ourselves every time because people might not know who we are if we're on Spotify.
That's a
But
good point. I was really going to confuse people because today, kind of where I was going with that story is, I thought you were already gone. So I thought I was going to be doing a solo podcast, which would have been weird, and I thought I would have been doing the intro, which would have sounded even more weird
solo
for people.
pod.
A solo pod, which I wouldn't have done great at, but we would have done it anyways just to figure it out. But
Mhm.
I was preparing myself all day to do the intro. I was nervous.
Brandon's like, oh, you're like rehearsing it at work. Welcome to episode 100 and what number are we on? Oh yeah, 103.
I would have sounded more enthusiastic than you.
Oh, thanks. I'll make sure to
No
do that
problem.
starting next week.
Yeah, sounds good.
But yeah, today's episode, I think we're gonna talk a bit about a sport that we don't talk about. Um, we're gonna talk a little bit of soccer, or if you're from our friends in Europe, you call it footy or football. We'll talk
Which
a bit about that because Canada had their a historic run. I mean, it's not technically over, even though they are playing in the third place game, but we'd like to basically say that it is over. And then I think we are going to go and quickly rank each team in the NHL 1 through 7 in their respective divisions.
1 through 8.
One
Got
through
it.
eight, sorry,
Got it. There you go.
my
Big
bad.
fan. But
Big
yeah, I
fan.
think yeah, we're not really soccer watchers because we're from Canada, but when popular tournaments like this go on, it is kind of fun to watch when countries come together like this. Um, and for Canada to be in a top four situation is historic in its own way, win or lose, which they did end up losing to Argentina, but they do got a big semifinal matchup against, or a bronze medal game against Uruguay, which I think is going to be another tough test. Uruguay is a pretty solid team.
Hmm.
Um, but honestly, Canada, you can see the improvements from the World Cup to this tournament. Like there was situations where against Venezuela, in the quarterfinals where Canada had the lead and then Venezuela scored late. Like I feel like Canada in the World Cup, they would have lost that game after allowing a late goal like that. Um, and they just their offense was a lot more dominant. Like I found in the World Cup, they were just playing defensive and trying to hold on. And as soon as the other team scored one goal, it felt like it was kind of over. But they were actually, and even against Argentina, they actually had a fair bit of pressure and turnovers. Obviously, Argentina is the number one ranked country, and they looked that way. But I thought Canada had their chances.
Yeah, I agree. I think they definitely did have their chances. They just there was always this one sort of, I mean, I'm not much of a soccer guy, but there was always like they seemed like they almost had one too many touches, or their touch was sort of around the net. Maybe they were a bit nervous and their touch was off, where they would like go to take a touch and they'd lose control and give it away. But yeah, I definitely noticed like Canada coming into the game was ranked 48th in the world. Obviously that'll go up now, because they haven't updated their world soccer rankings after these tournaments. So Canada will probably jump up into the top 25, I'd assume. But you could tell just like how snappy and how confident and how Argentina always knew like where everyone was. Especially watching Messi play. That's the first probably other than the World Cup, this like the past World Cup in Qatar. That was probably like the second time I've ever actually watched a soccer game that Messi was playing in that like wasn't highlights, and it's just incredible to see how how quick he is with the ball. Like his touches is insane with the ball, and I don't really like soccer. Like some like it was really hard to watch because with all like the diving and all that stuff, but that's just what you get with soccer. Um, but I have a lot of respect for Messi just based off how how much he impacts that game.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And I did feel like it was a super rough game. Like I thought there was a lot of hits that maybe weren't dives, but I don't even know the guy's name. But the guy in
The
Argentina with
Paul,
the long hair, yeah, that was tough to watch. I
yeah, that the
mean,
one that was a yellow card.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that
he just sort of
yeah.
brushed him, and the guy dropped like he been shot from a tree or something.
Yeah, like you can tell Canada's main sports are kind of more physical sports because if you look at the foul calls between teams, I think it was like 13-4 or something like
14 to
that.
5.
Yeah, so it was kind of lopsided in
But yeah,
Argentina's favor, but they
yeah.
hung
Anyway,
on.
as we noted, they play Saturday or tomorrow if you watch this when it comes out. In third place game, which this is their first ever time in the Copa America tournament, first ever time in the semifinals, and first ever time in a third place game. So, I feel like it's only up from here from Canada. They're very young. They're a very young team in general. So they always have room to grow, and you sort of see in this Argentinian team grow. So I'm not saying Canada will get to that number one in the world, but I think that the World Cup in 2026 is just another step where I think this team, the more reps they get together, the better they'll be.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see if they can advance in a World Cup
That would be
setting.
very cool. Anyways, let's get to some NHL because we actually have some idea, I guess, some sort of an idea of what we're talking about.
Kind of.
We're gonna go through the NHL rankings because today at work I was listening to the Locked On Penguins podcast and they went through the Metropolitan Division and ranked them 1 to 8. So I figured why not do this with the whole NHL.
Were they biased?
Nope.
Okay,
No, they're not.
fair enough.
Let's start with West because we'll do Pacific and Metro first because obviously that's where our favorite teams are. Um, let's go out to the Pacific. I think number 8, for me is going to be the Anaheim Ducks. I think it's a pretty easy pick. I think they're still really young. I'm picking Anaheim over San Jose just because I feel like San Jose did more free agency moves. So I guess I'll just go ahead and say San Jose is my 7. They just did had more impactful winning this year moves than Anaheim, which isn't a bad thing for Anaheim. I know they're still going to be bad and they're still going to continue to get those young players into the system. But I just think that San Jose adding to Foley and a guy like Wenberg, and adding like a Jake Wallman from the Detroit Red Wings will help them win more games than Anaheim this year. So 8 and 7, I have Anaheim and San Jose. Yeah, I don't know. Do you want me to go all the way?
Uh, sure, you can go all the way, and then I'll go all the way.
Okay, so my 6 is going to be Seattle. I think that. Oh no, sorry, Calgary. I have Calgary first. I think Calgary sort of was stuck in for the last like 2 to 3 years in sort of like the purgatory stages where they're sort of a mid team, and I think trading away Markstrom, I think Kadri will be on the move at some point, whether it's this off season or at the deadline, or he's going to be on the move. He's not going to be in Calgary for very much longer, I don't think. But I think they're finally starting to do right. And then I have Seattle. They made a lot of trying to win now moves, but I think they're sort of lateral moves. They're not going to get them sort of over the hump. I think they still missed the playoffs again. Goaltending still a big factor, and I don't like their center depth that much. Coming ahead of them, I have Vegas. I don't know that their depth has gotten pretty iffy because they've started to lose some of their depth players in free agency because their depth players have been playing so well for them that they're starting to get paid for sort of what they deserve, and Vegas has not been able to hold on to them. But I'm hoping for a bounce back year from Thomas Hertl. You know, he was hurt a lot. They traded a lot for him at the deadline, and they still have guys like Shea Theodore. He might be on the move though, and I've heard his name in trade talks trying to open up some cap. They still have Petrangelo, you know, guys like Dougie Hamilton. They still have some good players. What am I at? Three? My
Yeah.
third place team, I'm gonna have LA. Um, I like the Darcy Kemper trade. I think if he can sort of have a bounce back year, they're good there. Getting rid of Dubois, he didn't do much. They have some young talent still, like a Jordan Spence, like a Brant Clark, who I think we all know that I'm really high on. And I like their forward depth. Number two, I have Edmonton. This isn't saying that Edmonton isn't that Vancouver's a better team than Edmonton, as they're the only team left, so they're my one. I just think that um that the fact that Edmonton sort of went all this far in the playoffs, that not that they're not going to have a good regular season, but they're going to be like figure out sort of what Tampa did, where they don't have to always be the top seed. All they have to do is get into the playoffs and they can make noise. And then Vancouver at one. I like their goaltending, I like their defense, and I like their forward group adding to Bruss this offseason.
Yeah, I kind of follow a pretty similar list. I have the Ducks last. I just feel like a lot of the bottom feeding teams added in free agency where the Ducks didn't, which is why I think the Ducks will finish last. San Jose, they actually added a lot of veteran pieces, which I think will help their rookies in development and just it'll put more pucks in the net, which will accumulate more points. So I think they'll pass the Ducks in that regard. My third is the Flames. I feel like the Flames were kind of sellers, which I think is a good move by them. And like you said, they could be even more sellers if Kadri's on the move, which I feel like is in a good direction for them because we were talking last episode or two episodes ago where the Flames have just kind of been a middle team for a couple years, and they need to pick a direction, and they picked one, which is good. Um, I then have Seattle. I think Seattle made good moves, but I think we talked about last episode that it seemed kind of panicked and rushed, and I don't know if the moves they made are good enough to jump them higher in this division because it is a pretty stacked division. At 4, I have the LA Kings. I just feel like they did get worse this offseason. Um, and they only beat Vegas last year by 1 point, and Vegas is going to be more healthier this year. So I do have Vegas over jumping the Kings, but I do have Vegas at 3 just because I also feel like they did have a losing offseason, but their pieces I feel like are still better than LA. LA is getting older. A lot of their main pieces are like Kopitar, Doughty. They're getting older. Not sure about how Grubauer will be, so we'll see how that goes. Um,
Grubauer, you
so
mean
that's
Kemper?
why. Sorry, Kemfer, Grubauer. That's an
Grubauer
old
from
one.
Seattle.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I have Vegas ahead of them. I just think their star players are a little bit younger and better than LA. And with a healthy season, I still think they are good enough to be a top 3 team in this division. Then I have the Oilers at 2. I just think the additions Vancouver made this offseason will keep them above the Oilers, even though we expect the Oilers probably won't have as slow of a start as last season. I still feel like they're the second best team in this division behind Vancouver.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm fine with interchanging Vegas and LA. I think they're both playoff teams. They're just one's gonna be a wild card and one will obviously be third. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
let's move on to the Central. Um, I think it's I think it's pretty easy for the worst team in this division. I think it's still gonna be Chicago, but I just think that honestly, this Central division with how Utah added this offseason, I think St. Louis is still a competitive Nashville. This could probably be the best division in hockey this year, which we haven't said about the West, or maybe not the best, but the most competitive division in hockey this year, which we haven't said about the West for a while. You know, it's always been the East. I think the Pacific is still going to be just as tight, but the only not team that I wouldn't consider a playoff team is Chicago, and that's not saying that they're a bad team. They're just in a rebuild. They're starting to take their next steps. I want Chicago at 8. Following them, I'm gonna have St. Louis. I don't think St. Louis is a playoff team, but I could still see St. Louis having over 80 points easily. Um, 7, I'm gonna have Minnesota. I just think that buyout money, they're paying Suter and Parise still is just the fact that they can't really put some good players around guys like Kaprizov and Matt Boldy. I do like Marco Rossi, even though they are in reports that they're trying to trade him, which doesn't make sense considering he was very good this year after finally getting a shot after being drafted 8th overall a couple years ago. Coming behind that, um, this is sort of where it becomes really hard. Like, do I want to put Winnipeg there because they sort of had an off season? I think I'm going to. I think I'm going to have Winnipeg at 6, missing the playoffs, even though I was really high on them last year. Obviously, they still have Hellebuck. Um, but I think just losing guys like Toffoli and Monahan, I know they were trade deadline. Whatever this Rutger McGroarty situation is going on, will they get like an impact player for that? There's still a lot of question marks out in Winnipeg because, as we know, Winnipeg is not a very free agent friendly destination because it's very cold out there, and so Winnipeg has to be very sort of creative with their signings. 5, I'm gonna put Utah, and sort of um, am I at 5 or at 4?
4.
I'm at 4. Okay, Utah's at 4. I think that Utah made some very good strides this year. Obviously, being the old Arizona, they sort of had those young guys like Keller. Um, I think their goaltending is good with Melka and Ingram. Connor Ingram had a very good year last year, and they went out and signed. They brought in John Marino. They brought in Sergachev. You know, they made good strides this year, and I think they'll be sort of on the edge of a playoff team. But the fact that this division is uh, so competitive. I just think that they might miss out being a number 4 team in this division. 3, I'm gonna give Dallas. I think that Dallas, Nashville, and Colorado. I think you could put either of them 1 to 3, whichever way, and I would be fine with it. I think all 3 of these are sort of playoff locks. Obviously, we know what Nashville did this year, bringing in guys like Marcia Show, Stamkos, Brady Shea. They signed Saros to that major extension, and they still have guys like Askarov that they can trade. And they still have guys like I feel like now Philip Forsberg is gonna be like the most underrated player in the NHL this based off the fact that they brought in these guys, and he's still been an amazing player. So I'll put Nashville at 3, or I put Dallas at 3, Nashville at 2, Colorado at 1. But like I said, any 3 of those, if you put either of them between 1 to 3, I wouldn't have issues with any of them being at any of those spots.
Yeah, you make some good points. I do think Chicago will be the last team. I think they're kind of in the same situations as the Sharks, just in a tougher division where they added a lot of good vets around their young guys. But like you've been saying through your whole tangent there, the Central Division is just so stacked that even when you do that, it's hard to overjump a team. At 7, I am gonna have Minnesota. I just really don't like kind of where this team's direction is going. They've kind of just been a middling team for a couple of years now, and I don't really see a direction. Um, and I don't see a path to success for Minnesota personally. At 6, sorry, I have the St. Louis Blues. Again, I feel like they're kind of just that middling team where they're transitioning from old to new. Um, the new didn't really have good seasons last year. If you look at some of their players, like um, uh, whose Kyrou didn't have the greatest season. Robert Thomas kind of started picking it back up at the end, but didn't have a great start. So I kind of think it depends on those new guys and Bushnevich with the new contract. What they do will kind of depend on how St. Louis plays this year. At 5, I have Utah. I do like what they've done. I think they've added a lot of good pieces. And I think this is what the NHL has wanted the Arizona team to do for the last 20 years is give fans some interest. And unfortunately for Arizona fans, it was 1 year too late as they finally did these moves once they're in Utah. Um, so congrats to the Utah owner for making decisions like this really quickly and giving their fans some hope with trading away some young players who could be really good and probably will be really good, but getting players that are good right now and giving their team some sort of identity. Unfortunately, I think it's still not good enough to make playoffs, but
But
they're
I
at
think
least going.
I think they're on the right
Yeah,
track.
definitely. I really like what they did this offseason, which puts me at 4, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
Puts me at 4 where I have the Winnipeg Jets. Obviously, they did lose some pieces on the back end, and some key important forwards, like you said, some veteran forwards that played really well for them last year. And this Rutger McGroarty it's just giving me an uneasy feeling because we've seen stuff like this in the organization before, like with Blake Wheeler and some other veterans. I just don't know where this management team is, and it seems like a lot of the players aren't happy there when it comes time to moving. So I just feel like maybe that'll bring morale down a little bit. They might not have as good of a season as last year. At 3, I do have the Colorado Avalanche. I think they're still gonna be a powerhouse. Obviously not having Nichushkin's gonna hurt for the whole season, but we'll see how they play there. I don't know about Landeskog. Is Landeskog gonna play? I
I have
don't
no
think
clue.
so. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. So they are losing a lot of key pieces on the front end. Like locking up Casey Middlestat kind of points me in the direction that Landeskog might not be back because they just filled that 2C
Two
that kind of
C.
Landeskog was holding up. They are still a really good team though, just have lost a couple of pieces where I don't think they're the number one they were in the past. At 2, I will go Nashville. I think they added a ton. I think they're going to be one of the Stanley Cup favorites, but a lot of the players they added and a lot of the players on the team are older and they have lots of playoffs experience. And I think they know that to have a deep run in the playoffs, you don't need to be gunning for a President's Trophy. They're kind of like Tampa Bay, I feel like, where they know as long as we get in, we have a chance. So I feel like Nashville will obviously be a really good regular season team, but not be gunning for a division title. Where Dallas, in my mind, is the best team in this division. I I don't think they obviously lost in the defensive end. They did add pieces where they lost. Obviously, the pieces they added, like Labushkin and stuff, isn't as good as what they had, but they're still a really good young team. The younger players are just gaining experience, and the vets are still good on this team. So I still think they're a well-rounded team that's going to win this division.
Yeah, we'll move into the Metro just because on the score I'm scrolling up and the Metro's the next one that I hit. I think in this division, I think it can be competitive, but it might be competitively mid if that makes sense. Like there's a lot
Yep.
of I think you can separate this division into three categories. You have Columbus at 8, and then I think you have sort of three teams in the mid category, um, maybe four, 4.5, 3.5 teams in the mid category, and then I think there's three teams that are just at the top of this division. So obviously coming at 8 is Columbus. I think they're still miles away. The Monahan signing was a bit iffy on my part. I just maybe he's there to mentor. I don't know. He obviously signed there for a reason, so they have some sort of plan with him. At 7, I still have Philly. I think they are going to make noise for what they did this year. And Michkov coming over. It'll be interesting to see how he develops in sort of the National Hockey League, playing in the KHL for so many years. I still think that this team is maybe 2 to 3 years away from seeing the playoffs, maybe two. Who knows how Tortorella was go? I know that he's never really in a spot for too long anymore, based off the fact that I think players sort of just get fed up with him, or ownership gets fed up with him. Um, that's 6. I'm gonna be biased and put the Islanders here. Before the Penguins, I'm gonna put the Penguins at 5. But I think that the Penguins and Islanders are interchangeable, but I'm just going to put the Penguins ahead of them to make myself feel a little bit better. I did like the Duclair signing by the Islanders, but I still think that they're missing goal scoring, and they're just a boring team to watch. So, but it'll be interesting to see what Patrick Waugh can do in his first full season behind that bench, and we'll see if Sorokin can have a bounce back as Varlamov sort of took the net in the playoffs. I don't think I have to say much about Pittsburgh being my favorite team. They just had a puzzling off season. I still think they can be good, and I honestly think that if these players play together and they get contributions from their depth, and Jari and Nedeljkovic, neither of them get hurt and play well, I think this team does have a chance to slip into the playoffs, but I don't think it will happen. Maybe that's just me being hopeful. Uh, at 4, I have the Capitals. I think they sort of made some moves to stay competitive in Ovi's last 2 years. Are they a contender? Absolutely not. Are they gonna make the playoffs? I would give them yes, but I think these sort of moves have been more just to keep them competitive in Ovi's final years and sort of help them chase that goal record. Number 3 is Carolina. I think they've got significantly worse, but I mean, significant's a big word, but they definitely have gotten worse. They've lost their goal scoring from Gensel. They did bring in players like Gostisbehere and Sean Walker, who I like both those moves. They're both puck moving defensemen that like to jump up in the rush. Um, Number two, I have the Rangers. The Rangers, I don't, not that they scare me, but like their defense scares me the most. Their forward group is good. Who knows what the heck's going on with Truba? I heard there was a deal in place, and he said no to his no trade clause because of his wife. Like in her last year of doctor school. So I have no idea what's going on with the Truba situation, but we already know what Shesterkin is, best goalie in the world. Their forward group is good. Their defense is the only question marks with me. And number one, I think the Devils are the best team in this division with the moves they've made this offseason. I really like them bringing in Keefe as their head coach. I don't think he's a bad head coach. I think he's just sort of like the Toronto scapegoat in this situation, like all people in Toronto are if they don't play good. But I mean, Markstrom, we know he's a decent goalie. I think Luke Hughes gets 1 year better. Jack Hughes is going to get better. You got Jesper Bratt. You know, the team just has some names that can do damage. I think they're going to be right back in the playoffs, and I think they're the best team in this division.
Yeah, they make a lot of good points. Obviously, Columbus is last. There's not much to say there. They're just definitely the worst team in this division. At 7, I will have Philadelphia just because, like you said, they had a miracle season last year and they still finished third last in this division. So if they don't have as hot of a start as they did last year, that it's just not going to help them. So I do feel like they're just going to kind of come back from the spectacular start they had last year. Like if you look at the last month of their season, it was really bad. So I think they'll kind of average out from the beginning to the end, the good and the bad. I think it'll average out to be just a pretty average team and finish seventh in this division. Um, I will go a little bit opposite. I will go Pittsburgh here. Um, I think both teams had needs between them and the Islanders. I'm just interchanging the Islanders and the Penguins, where I think the Islanders added to their needs a little bit more. Obviously, the Islanders don't have anywhere near as much goal scoring as they're going to need to be a playoff contender. But Duclair is a guy who puts the puck in the net, so I think he will help that a little bit. And the Islanders did have 6 more points than the Penguins last year, and I think Duclair's just going to help with that. So I will keep them above the Penguins. I just think that to your point, obviously, I think if it's your favorite team, you should believe they have a playoff chance, obviously. And I think they do. The only problem with me, and if you guys actually listened to the whole episode last week, I kind of went on a Penguins tangent, and that's why the podcast ended early. Noah just ended it on me
No, I
because he
didn't.
didn't
Good
like it.
try.
Yeah. But I just feel like Sidney Crosby had like, obviously, we know Sidney Crosby's a great hockey player. Did you expect the season he had last year to happen? Like, I think it was
I
a
mean,
really,
I think
really good
I don't
season.
I think he had a great season, one of his best in a while, but I don't think that like the type of player or like he's a top five player of all time probably right now in my eyes. Um, I don't think we should really be shocked at the season he had, but yeah, he definitely had one of the best 36-year-old seasons from Sidney Crosby. We'll see. He is getting 1 year older, but I don't think he's going to take that much of a step back. Like he's on the ice
I
every
don't.
day.
No, no,
He's
no.
an
That's not my
incredible
point.
athlete.
That's not my point. I'm saying Sidney Crosby had, like you said, one of the best old age seasons of all time, and Pittsburgh still was like 6 points out of it. So even if he duplicates that, like you said, you're going to need players to step up that I'm just not sure if they can. So I will have the Islanders above Pittsburgh. My 4 team will be the Capitals. I really think they're going to finish in the same spot they did last year, probably last wild card spot, in my opinion. Where the only differences from last year to this year is I think they actually could obviously not make a run, but I think they won't get swept. I think they got a lot better. I think um, Ovechkin and the Capitals are kind of doing what Pittsburgh fans are probably hoping Pittsburgh did. They're
No
trying to
kidding.
at least stay competitive. Like even if the trades don't work out in Washington's favor, they were going to be bad anyways. So who cares if it doesn't work out? There's only upside there. So I think that's the Capitals made great moves, and I don't think they will win a Stanley Cup, but I think they could pose more of a threat than they did last year in the playoffs. My 3 team will be the Hurricanes, just because, like you were saying, I think the Metro is competitive, but not at the top. Um, Carolina's just better than these teams, even though, like you were saying, they did get significantly worse. They did have 111 points this year. Are they going to drop 11 points and be under 100? I don't think so. I think they'll be low 100 points, and that'll get you top 3 in the Metro because they still do have a really good offensive core, and that'll be good enough to get them top 3 in the Metro. My 2 is actually going to be the Devils. I think they added a ton and I really like the moves at goalie. I really like Sheldon Keefe, like you were saying, and I think, like you were saying as well, the younger guys are just going to be that much better. But to jump from 81 points to Metro Division champ seems like a big leap to me. So I will have them at 2 because I'm not going to expect them to jump a President's Trophy winning team from last year, which has me at the Rangers at 1. Um, the Trouba stuff has been a little weird, but I think they're both like the Rangers are an experienced franchise, and Trouba's a person who just won the best leader in the NHL award. I think they will be able to put that aside, and I think the Rangers will have another good season. I don't think they'll be a President's Trophy winner again, but I think good enough to win the Metro.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Like I said, I'm gonna put Pittsburgh ahead of Islanders just because my favorite team.
Hmm.
But they are interchangeable. I do agree that
For
Pittsburgh
sure.
is a mid team. I still think Kyle Dubas. I'd like to think that Kyle Dubas still has something up his sleeve, like a trade.
I hope
Um,
so.
I do too. Like I don't
I'm
know.
a Canadian.
I don't even
I'm a
want to throw something out, but I think I want to hope that Dubas has something up his sleeve. But anyways,
yeah.
moving on to the Atlantic, probably one of the like the Central, one of the most competitive teams in this division. I think the eight's pretty easy, but I think that Montreal is 2 to 3 years away from being a very good team. Like their pipeline is deep. They
Oh,
have
they're gonna be
young
so
they
good,
have
and
young
I'm gonna
players that
hate
are
it.
locked up. Like the the Suzuki, Caulfield, and Slavkovsky deals are going to look great in 2 to 3 years whenever these players just keep getting better with the cap. So I am very excited to see Montreal's future, especially with like guys like Demidov. Um, I'm gonna forget a bunch of their pipeline players, but they just have a really good pipeline. Oh, that Hudson kid that they just drafted. Or no, Lane Hudson. He got
Yeah.
drafted 2 years ago. He's gonna make their roster this year, but I really like watching him play.
And who's the defenseman from last year?
Logan Mayu.
No, then 2 years ago. Who was it? The top 5 pick.
Oh, Reinbacher.
Yeah, Ryan Backer's
Reinbacher. I
still.
don't know.
Yeah, he's still there too.
Yeah,
Oh,
so this team is going to be very good in a couple of years. That I think Montreal fans just have to be patient for another 2 to 3 years, which is kind of hard for Montreal fans to do.
yeah.
Last year, this I remember doing this last year, and my seven, I put Boston. I'm not going to do that again. I'm gonna
Do it.
put I'm gonna put Detroit. I just think that this team made lateral moves. I know I said it earlier, but I don't know. I think the Eyes are playing is kind of confusing me. Tarasenko's a good ad. Patrick Kane, sure, but he's 34. You have to lock up your young guys like Raymond and Sider, and I still think there's a bit of question marks in the goaltending situation. Um, at my six, I'm gonna put Buffalo. Same thing with they've been the same thing with Detroit. They have their young guys, but they just sort of haven't made that next step. The Ryan McLeod trade was really confusing considering you gave up on Matthew Savoy after he had like
Yeah.
70 points in 30 some WHL games this year. I'm not going to get into that because we only have 4 minutes left on our counter timer here. Um, Next team, I'm gonna put. See, this is where it gets tough. I'm gonna put Ottawa, but it's very hard for me to put Ottawa here. I could probably interchange them with Boston. Not that I think Boston's bad, but I do think Ottawa's gonna have a better year. Um, but with that being said, Ottawa will be my five. My four is gonna be Boston, but I do think they make the playoffs. Um, Three, I'm gonna put Tampa. I know we've been over the whole Stamkos thing, but I think Gensel's a better player than Stamkos at this point of his career. And watching what sort of if Tampa rolls out a point Gensel Kucherov line, that's gonna be absolutely disgusting to watch. Two, I have the Leafs. I'm still hoping that they add for a top six winger and depth. It'll be interesting to see if they trade Robertson. Obviously goaltending is always gonna have question marks for Toronto if they can stay healthy. But I think Toronto, obviously, we know what they can do, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with Marner. And number one, I'm going to put Florida. I think that even though they did lose a couple depth pieces, I think they'll be just fine, and they'll be back to defend their title.
Yeah, I agree with most of this list. I have the Canadians at last, which being a Leafs fan, Canadians fans might think that's me just being mean, but honestly,
Mm.
me putting them last is probably good for them, which hurts me because they're just going to get another top pick and add to that insane rookies that they have. At 7, I am going to have Buffalo. I just don't think they added much. We're going to have to see some like a healthy Tage Thompson is going to be huge, and stuff like that. But and they got Bowen Byram now and players like that. But I still don't see the path for Buffalo. At 6, I'm gonna go Detroit. Like you said, it was pretty lateral. All they did was add Tarasenko. So I just again, you said the Iser plan's kind of confusing. I agree. I thought they should be so much better than they are right now. I'm gonna have them at 6. I keep putting Ottawa high and I'm gonna do it because they have a good roster, a really good roster. They just don't perform. So I'll have Ottawa at 5 or at 6, sorry, or 5. No, at 5.
Yeah, 5.
So the top 4 is the same for me as last year. At 4, I am gonna go Boston just because Swayman hasn't signed. And what's
Apparently there's
going on
tension
there?
there. I've heard there's tension.
That's what I mean. It sounds like it's not close. And for a team that just traded away Altmark, like if you don't sign Swayman, this is going to be huge for this franchise. And for I just feel like they're getting older. I don't think they added a whole lot. They lost a couple pieces, and that Swayman thing is scaring me. So I'll put them at 4. At 3, I do have Tampa. I think obviously the Stamkos situation is weird, but I do think Gensel will end up being a better player than Stamkos in the duration of this contract. So I think they added. Um, I think Victor Hedman will be the captain this upcoming season, and I just think this team is going to be good still. At 2, let me finish. I have Florida, and at 1, I have Toronto. I'm not even trying to be biased. I honestly do think there is a Stanley Cup playoff slump at the start of a season. And I feel like now that the Panthers have won and they've been to back Stanley Cups, they know that the regular season doesn't matter as much, where Toronto still guns in the regular season, and I hate it every time. But I feel like Florida will start easing their play back in the regular season because it seems as though what killed them in the first years they were hurt, where this year they kind of stayed pretty healthy. So I think they'll ease it back in the regular season. I would take Florida over Toronto in a playoff series, but I will give Toronto the number 1 seed in the Atlantic just because they try really hard in the regular season and then don't in the playoffs.
Yeah. So we have less than a minute. We're gonna get kicked off, but I think we'll wrap it up there. If you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like, subscribe. I'm gonna go pretend to be a cowboy for a week, and we'll be back next week.
Have fun.